January 1787. A highly decorated American war hero stands in the freezing snow, staring at a beautiful ornate sword in his hands. It was a personal gift from the legendary French Marquis de Lafayette, awarded to him for his remarkable bravery fighting the British Empire. Today, this proud veteran is forced to sell that glorious sword just to buy a single loaf of bread for his starving family. His name is Daniel Shays. He survived the horrific, devastating battles of the American Revolution, only to return home to a newly formed country that has completely and utterly abandoned him. Today, we witness the terrifying moment when the United States almost tore itself apart. We explore the massive economic collapse, the agonizing desperation of unpaid veterans, and the tragic day when American cannons fired devastating grapeshot directly into the ranks of American heroes. To understand this explosive rebellion, we must examine the complete failure of the first American government. After defeating the British, the 13 states were loosely connected by a document called the Articles of Confederation. It was not a real government. It was merely a weak, powerless treaty of friendship. There was no president, there was no Supreme Court. The National Congress had absolutely no legal authority to collect taxes, regulate trade, or draft soldiers. When they needed money to pay off massive war debts, they could only politely ask the states for donations. The states simply ignored them. To survive, Congress recklessly printed millions of paper dollars until the currency became entirely worthless. The national economy plunged into an absolute abyss. In Massachusetts, the situation was incredibly dire. The state government in Boston was completely dominated by wealthy coastal merchants. To pay off their own debts, these politicians passed heavy crushing taxes on the citizens. They strictly demanded that these new taxes be paid entirely in hard silver or gold coins. But the farmers in the western part of the state had absolutely no silver or gold. They operated on a barter system. When these veterans could not pay the new taxes in hard currency, ruthless debt collectors arrived at their doors. The state began aggressively foreclosing on the farms these men had spent generations building. If selling the farm was not enough to cover the debt, the state did something truly unforgivable. They threw these decorated war heroes into freezing, damp, highly diseased debtors' prisons. They locked men in cages for the crime of being poor after serving their country. The bitter resentment boiled over into pure rage. Daniel Shays, a former Continental Army captain, watched his fellow veterans lose everything. He decided they had to act immediately before they all perished in prison. In the late summer of 1786, Shays and other local leaders organized thousands of desperate, furious farmers. They proudly put their old, faded military uniforms back on. They pinned sprigs of evergreen to their hats as a symbol of their unified resistance. Holding their old hunting muskets and heavy iron pitchforks, they marched directly on the local courthouses in Massachusetts. Their strategic logic was incredibly simple, but highly effective. If the judges cannot enter the courthouse building, they cannot legally issue foreclosure orders to take the farms. The farmers physically blockaded the courts, completely shutting down the state justice system. The wealthy politicians in Boston absolutely panicked. They frantically appealed to the National Congress for urgent military assistance. But the national government was completely paralyzed. They had absolutely no money, no resources, and no national army to send. Congress was utterly useless in the face of an armed uprising. To protect their personal property, the wealthy merchants in Boston pooled their own money. They privately funded a mercenary army, commanded by General Benjamin Lincoln, and sent them west to crush the angry farmers. Daniel Shays realized his men were now facing a well-funded, heavily armed military force. They desperately needed more firepower and heavy artillery. He set his sights on the Federal Arsenal, located in Springfield, Massachusetts. This massive armory held thousands of muskets, bayonets, barrels of gunpowder, and heavy artillery pieces. If the farmers captured it, they could effectively overthrow the oppressive state government. On the freezing afternoon of January the 25th, 1787, Shays led over 1,000 angry farmers toward the Springfield Armory. A severe, blinding winter blizzard battered the region, disrupting their communications with other rebel columns. As they approached the armory through waist-deep snow, they found it firmly defended by local state militia, commanded by General William Shepherd. Shays and his men genuinely expected the local militia to step aside. They firmly believed their fellow citizens would sympathize with their agonizing poverty and refuse to fight. But Shepherd remained fiercely loyal to the state government. He ordered his men to fire 2 warning shots from their heavy cannons directly over the heads of the advancing farmers. The massive roar echoed through the freezing air, but the veterans did not flinch. They had faced British cannons before. They continued marching forward, completely determined to seize the weapons. Then, General Shepherd made a fatal, heartbreaking decision. He ordered his artillerymen to lower the elevation of the heavy cannons. He commanded them to fire directly into the center of the advancing American column. The cannons unleashed a devastating point-blank volley of grapeshot. Dozens of heavy iron balls tore through the freezing air and slammed violently into the rebel ranks. 4 men perished instantly, their bodies shattered in the freezing snow. 20 others were severely wounded, leaving heartbreaking crimson stains across the pure white ground. The horrific shock of Americans using heavy artillery to destroy their own countrymen completely shattered the momentum of the rebellion. The farmers retreated in absolute horror. General Lincoln's private mercenary army soon arrived, relentlessly chasing the remaining rebels through the freezing winter wilderness until the uprising was completely and totally crushed. Daniel Shays fled deep into the dense forests, eventually escaping across the border to Vermont. The rebellion was officially defeated, but it sent a massive, terrifying shockwave across all 13 states. George Washington, sitting comfortably by his fireplace at Mount Vernon, read the reports from Massachusetts in absolute horror. He wrote to his former officers, expressing his deep fear that they had fought the revolution only to build a nation that was now collapsing into chaos. He realized the Articles of Confederation were a catastrophic, undeniable failure. The nation was rapidly sliding into total anarchy and civil war. The weak, paralyzed national government could not even protect its own federal armory from an angry mob. The political leaders across the continent recognized that the grand American experiment was on the absolute brink of total destruction. They needed a powerful, functional national government immediately, or the British Empire would simply return and conquer them again. This terrifying crisis forced 55 prominent men to gather in Philadelphia. They will lock the massive wooden doors, close the windows in the sweltering heat, and commit a secret political coup to tear up the old laws and forge an entirely new framework of supreme power. How do you design a national government strong enough to maintain order, but limited enough to prevent tyranny? We will witness the dramatic, highly secretive birth of the United States Constitution in the next episode. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel.